The morning was calm, soft and golden. Light touched the curtains, slipping into the quiet room like a gentle visitor. The house was still, filled only with the faint hum of electricity and the steady tick-tock of an old clock on the wall. It was one of those mornings that felt safe, like time itself had slowed down, holding everything in a warm pause. He sat on the couch, a thin blanket resting across his lap. The television glowed softly in front of him, playing a film he had seen many times before. It was not the film itself that mattered. It was the feeling it gave him. Familiar scenes, old music, voices from another time. Watching it made him feel as though the world outside had disappeared, leaving only this moment of peace. The faint clink of a spoon in a cup sounded from the kitchen. It was ordinary, small, but it carried through the walls like a note in a song. The boy smiled to himself. He liked sounds like that, the kind that reminded him he was not alone even when the house was quiet. He shifted on the couch, pulling the blanket closer as the film played on. The characters on screen laughed together, their voices filled with joy, and for a moment he let himself sink deeper into the story. But then, something subtle changed. He felt a presence. It was not loud or sudden. It was as simple as the air moving differently, as gentle as the way silence bends when another person steps into it. She had entered the room. She walked slowly, not wanting to disturb him, but her footsteps on the soft carpet seemed louder than they should have been. Her hand rested for a moment on the edge of the doorframe, and then she stepped fully into the living room. Her eyes flickered toward the screen, then toward him. The boy noticed her, though he pretended to keep his attention on the movie. There was something about her gaze, something that made the air feel warmer, heavier. It was not the first time she had walked into the room, not the first time she had seen him watching a film. And yet, this morning, it felt different. She smiled, gently, a quiet, almost secret kind of smile. "You're watching that again?" she asked softly, her voice low, careful not to break the calm. He nodded, still half looking at the screen. "Yeah, I like it. It feels nice." His words were simple, but his tone carried more. He did not know why, but he felt nervous, as though saying too much would reveal something he could not name. She moved closer, her steps slow, the faint sound of fabric brushing with each movement. She carried a cup of tea, steam rising and lazy, curls above it. The smell, warm, sweet, and familiar, joined the air between them. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper. He looked at her then, just for a moment, and nodded. His heart gave a quiet, steady thump, though he tried not to let it show. She settled onto the other side of the couch, not too close, not too far. The cushion dipped slightly under her weight, and the blanket on his lap shifted a little with the movement. She set the cup on the table, and the sound of porcelain meeting wood was small but sharp in the silence. For a while, neither of them spoke. The film continued, filling the room with gentle dialogue and soft music, yet the silence between them felt louder than anything on the screen. It was not an empty silence. It was full of things neither of them said, full of a closeness neither of them named. He glanced at her, quick and careful, and found that she was already looking at him. She turned her gaze back to the television, but the faintest trace of a smile remained on her lips. The clock ticked on. The film played. The hum of the house continued. And yet in that quiet morning something had shifted. It was small, almost invisible. But it was there. The warmth in the air had deepened, as though the sunlight itself had leaned closer to watch them. He felt it in the way his chest rose and fell, heavier now. He felt it in the way his hands gripped the blanket just a little tighter. He felt it in the way every second seemed longer, stretched out like the pause between two breaths. And she felt it too. She did not need to say it. She sat still, her fingers resting on her lap, her eyes half on the movie and half on the boy beside her. The tea on the table grew cooler with every passing minute. Forgotten. The morning was calm, soft, and golden. But beneath the calm, something new had begun to stir, something fragile, something they both noticed but chose not to name. Dot. The film ended eventually, the credits rolling in white letters across the dark screen, but neither of them moved to turn it off. The silence held them there, wrapped in its strange, quiet spell. The boy thought to himself, "This feels different. This feels important." And she, without speaking, thought almost the same. Asterisk. The living room stayed quiet, except for the faint echo of the film's music still playing. The boy sat still on the couch, but inside, his mind was not still. He could feel her near him, the space between them alive in a way he could not explain. She shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket on her side of the couch. The soft sound of fabric brushing against fabric carried into the silence, and though it was such a small sound, he noticed it. He noticed everything: her movement, the rhythm of her breathing, the warmth that seemed to reach across the cushion. The clock ticked again. 1, 2, 3. Every second felt longer than before. She leaned forward a little, resting her elbows on her knees, her eyes on the television. "You always watch movies like this," she said softly, her voice almost playful. "Like you're lost inside them." He smiled faintly, embarrassed but trying not to show it. "Maybe. I like how they take me somewhere else." His words were simple, but she heard the meaning beneath them. The desire for escape, the need for comfort. She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. Her expression was gentle, but there was something in her eyes that made the boy's chest tighten. A question she didn't ask, a thought she didn't share. The movie played on, its soundtrack soft and familiar, but he was no longer really watching. His focus was on her. Every time she moved, even slightly, he felt it like a wave touching him. The faint sigh she released, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her leg, the way her presence filled the room more than the glow of the television. She reached for the cup of tea on the table. The porcelain clinked softly and she lifted it carefully, taking a slow sip. The steam rose, carrying the sweet scent into the air again. She set the cup back down and the sound seemed to echo in his ears. "You like this movie so much?" she said after a pause. "But do you ever think, maybe it's not just the movie? Maybe it's what it makes you feel?" Her words were quiet, thoughtful, and they lingered between them. He looked at her then, meeting her eyes for the first time that morning. The look was brief, almost too quick, but in that short glance, something passed between them. Something unspoken. He looked back at the screen quickly, his heart beating louder in his chest. He didn't want her to notice, but he knew she already had. She smiled, not mocking him, not teasing, but in a way that suggested she understood more than he had said. She leaned back against the couch, her shoulder brushing faintly against the cushion closer to him. It was not a touch, not yet, but it was close enough to make the air heavy again. The boy shifted slightly, unsure of what to do with his hands, unsure of what to say. He thought about speaking, but his voice felt caught in his throat. The silence grew larger, but it was not empty. It was charged, filled with words neither dared to say. She broke it gently. "It's nice, isn't it? Just sitting here. Quiet, not needing to explain anything." He nodded, grateful for her words, grateful for the way she had softened the moment. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "It is." The television screen flickered, light and shadow moving across their faces. In the shifting glow, they seemed almost closer, as though the room itself was folding in around them. Her eyes lingered on him again, and she let out the faintest sigh, so soft it was almost part of the silence. "Sometimes," she said, her voice thoughtful, "the best moments are the ones we can't name." Her words sank deep, filling him with something he didn't have language for. He looked at her again, just long enough to feel it. The pull, the connection, the warmth that was growing like fire under the quiet surface of the morning. And then, almost as though the world outside had remembered them, a sound came from beyond the window. A car passing on the street. A reminder that life went on, that the world existed beyond this room. But inside, in that small living room with its faint ticking clock and soft morning light, it felt like only the two of them mattered. He turned back to the movie, but he was no longer watching. He was aware of her, of the closeness, of the way the air seemed heavier now. She rested her hand lightly on the blanket, near his, not touching but close. The distance was small, only an inch or two, but it was enough to send a quiet shiver through him. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They simply stayed there side by side, in the quiet that was no longer just quiet. The film kept playing. The clock kept ticking. But inside, something else had started. Something both of them felt but neither of them dared to name. The presence was unexpected, but it had changed everything. The movie flickered on the screen, its story moving forward. But for the boy and the woman beside him, the real story was happening in the quiet between them. The blanket still rested across his lap. The half-finished cup of tea still sat on the table, but now the silence felt different. It was heavy, yes, but it was also alive, like the air was waiting for something to happen. She shifted slightly, leaning back against the couch, her eyes still on the glowing screen. Then, without looking at him, she said softly, "You're watching so carefully. Do you plan to become a director one day?" Her tone was light, teasing. It broke the silence, but not in a loud way. It was more like a spark in the dark. He blinked, caught off guard by her words, then laughed nervously. "No, I don't think so. I just like watching, that's all." She tilted her head toward him, her lips curving into a faint smile. I don't believe that. You sit here, like you're studying every detail, like you're trying to memorize it." He looked down, embarrassed, then shrugged. "Maybe I am. Maybe I just like remembering things." Her smile grew, soft but playful. "Careful. That sounds deep. If you start talking like that, I'll think you're hiding a secret." Her words hung in the air, half joke, half truth. He glanced at her quickly, his heart skipping at the suggestion. "Maybe I am," he said before he could stop himself. Her laughter came then, quiet and warm like a soft bell ringing in the still house. The sound filled the room in a way the movie could not. "Ah, so you admit it," she said, her voice still teasing but touched with something gentler. He shook his head quickly, his cheeks warm. "I didn't mean it like that." "Of course not," she replied, her tone playful, but her eyes told another story. The boy turned his face back to the television, but he could still feel her gaze. It lingered, light but steady, as though she was trying to read the spaces between his words. He swallowed, the warmth in his chest growing stronger, harder to ignore. To distract himself, he pointed at the screen. "This part's funny," he said, almost too quickly. "Watch, he's about to trip." She looked, and right on cue, the character stumbled across the stage, drawing laughter from the audience in the film. She laughed too, a soft laugh that made him smile without meaning to. "You always notice things like that," she said once. Her laughter faded. "The little parts that other people might miss." He shrugged again, shy. "I guess I just pay attention." She said, leaning a little closer, her voice lowering. "Then I wonder, what else are you paying attention to?" Her words dropped into the silence like a pebble in still water, making ripples that reached all the way to him. He froze for a moment, his breath catching, his heart suddenly loud in his chest. He looked at her, unsure if she was still joking, but her expression was unreadable. A smile, yes, but her eyes were deeper, softer, like she was saying more than her words. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched. She leaned back, letting out a small laugh, playful again. "Don't worry, I won't ask. Some secrets are better left unsaid." Her words felt like both a comfort and a challenge. He smiled weakly, unsure of what to say. The film moved on, but neither of them really watched it anymore. Their focus had shifted, their attention locked in the dance of small words, hidden meanings, and playful silences. She reached for her tea again, but this time, when she set the cup down, her fingers brushed lightly against his on the blanket. It was only a second, maybe less, but it was enough to send a quiet shiver through him. He didn't move his hand. He didn't pull away, and she didn't, either. Instead, she spoke again, her tone softer now, almost a whisper. Funny how movies can bring people closer, isn't it? He nodded slowly, his throat dry, his voice almost caught. Yeah, it is. The clock ticked on, steady and calm, but the room itself felt like it had changed again. The warmth had deepened, the air heavier with every passing second. The playful exchange had left its mark. It was no longer just teasing, no longer just light words. It had become something more. Something unspoken but undeniable. She leaned back once more, her eyes on the screen, though her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. You know, she said softly, sometimes the best parts of a movie aren't the story at all. Sometimes it's the way we watch it, with someone else. Her words settled over him like a blanket, warm and heavy. He wanted to reply, to say something, but the weight in his chest made it hard. So he only nodded. The silence, speaking for him. The movie continued, the light flickering across their faces. But for the boy, the real story was no longer on the screen. It was right here, in the room, in the playful words and the charged quiet between them. And though neither of them said it out loud, both of them knew. Something had started that morning. Something they could not easily stop. The movie still played, but it had become only a shadow in the room. Its sounds were there, its music soft, but neither of them really listened. The real weight lay in the silence between them, the silence that seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute. The boy sat still, the blanket still pulled across his lap, but inside his chest felt restless. He could hear the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, every second louder than the one before. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He could even hear his own breathing, too loud in the quiet. She shifted slightly, beside him, and the sound of her movement, so small, so ordinary, echoed like thunder in his ears. He didn't look at her, but he felt her presence, strong and close. The silence was not empty. It was full of things unspoken, full of questions that neither dared to ask, full of feelings they both tried to hide. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the couch cushion, close to his, not touching, but near enough that he could feel the warmth. The closeness made his heartbeat quicken, steady like a quiet drum inside him. She glanced at him, her eyes soft, watching him from the side. He didn't notice at first, but then he turned his head and their eyes met for only a second. 1 second was enough. The air seemed to stop. He looked away quickly, back to the screen, though he had no idea what scene was playing. His chest rose and fell a little faster. The silence pressed heavier around him. She smiled faintly, though not the playful smile from before. This one was softer, almost fragile. She leaned back slightly, her voice a whisper, almost part of the quiet itself. You don't talk much, do you? He blinked, surprised by her sudden words. I guess not, he said, his voice low, almost careful. She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. It's fine. Sometimes silence says more than words. Her voice lingered in the air, sinking into him. He didn't know how to reply. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier, but not uncomfortable. It was charged like a thread stretched tight between them. The movie's soundtrack swelled for a moment, filling the room with soft music, but it only seemed to underline the stillness between them. The boy shifted again, his fingers gripping the blanket, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen he wasn't really seeing. She let out a soft sigh, a sound so faint he almost missed it. Do you ever feel like some moments are too quiet to ignore? She asked, her voice low, almost trembling. With unspoken meaning. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Yeah, he whispered. I do. Their eyes met again, longer this time. The silence stretched deeper and deeper, until it felt like the whole world had fallen away. Her gaze lingered, her eyes searching his, as though she wanted to say something, but couldn't. He felt the same. Words pressed at the back of his throat, but none of them seemed right. Instead, they stayed quiet. The silence spoke for them. A faint sound broke through, the distant call of a bird outside, carried through the window. The world was still there, but in the room, time felt stopped. She moved her hand slightly, her fingers brushing the blanket closer to his. Still not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth stronger now. His hand twitched, almost reaching, but he held still. Her lips parted, as if she might speak again, but she didn't. She closed them softly, choosing silence once more. The boy let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart pounded louder, steady, like a faint echo of a drum. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive. It was full of longing, full of questions, full of feelings too tender to name. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. It was hard to tell. The movie neared its end, but neither of them moved. They sat in the heavy quiet, side by side, breathing, the same air, caught in the same unspoken moment. The clock ticked again. Tick. Tock. The sound marked the passing of time, but neither of them cared. For them, the silence itself had become the story. Finally, she whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear it. Sometimes the hardest part is not saying what we feel. Her words sank into him, filling the silence with a weight even heavier than before. He looked at her, his lips parting as if to answer, but no sound came out. And she smiled, faint and bittersweet, as though she already knew his answer without him speaking it. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer a pause. It was a confession, wordless, fragile, but real. The boy leaned back, his chest still heavy, his thoughts tangled. The silence wrapped around them both, tender and tense, almost too much to hold. And in that quiet, something had shifted again, something invisible, but undeniable. The silence between words had become louder than words themselves. The credits of the movie rolled slowly across the screen, white letters over black, music playing softly. But neither of them moved to turn it off. They sat there, side by side, the glow from the television casting faint shadows on their faces. The boy shifted, pulling the blanket a little tighter around him, though he wasn't cold. His chest rose and fell faster than before, as if every breath carried more weight. He could feel her close, so close, and the silence between them was alive again, full of words neither of them spoke. She leaned back, her eyes still on the screen, though she wasn't really watching. Her hand rested lightly on the couch cushion, just inches from his. The distance was small, almost nothing at all, but it felt enormous, as if the entire moment hinged on that space. The clock ticked on. Tick, tock. Each second felt louder, sharper, like it was counting down to something neither of them wanted to name. Finally, she whispered, her voice soft, almost breaking the quiet too gently to disturb it. Strange, isn't it? How one morning can feel different from all the rest. He turned his head, looking at her, the glow from the screen reflected in her eyes, soft and warm. He swallowed, his throat tight. Yeah, he said, his voice low. It does feel different. Their eyes held for a moment longer than before. The air thickened, the silence stretching again. Neither of them looked away. She let out a faint laugh, nervous but tender. If someone walked in right now, I wonder what they'd think. Her words carried a hidden meaning, something both playful and serious at once. He smiled faintly, though his hands gripped the blanket tighter. They'd probably think we were just watching a movie. Her lips curved, the corner of her mouth lifting. Just watching? She asked, her voice light but edged with something deeper. The boy's chest tightened. His heart thumped steady in his ears, loud, insistent. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything. But the words stuck. She moved slightly, leaning just a little closer. Not much, but enough that he could feel the warmth from her shoulder. The distance between them shrank again, and the silence seemed to pulse heavy and alive. Her hand shifted on the couch, brushing lightly against the blanket where his hand still rested. The touch was small, almost nothing. But to him, it was everything. He froze. His breath caught. His fingers twitched slightly, but he didn't pull away. She noticed. She always noticed. Her eyes flickered to his hand, then back to his face. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were soft, searching. The silence swelled. The ticking clock seemed far away now. The hum of the house faded. The world outside no longer mattered. Her voice came again, quiet, like a secret. You know what happens next? The boy's heart pounded louder, his mind spinning. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The words weren't needed. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both courage and fear. Don't worry, she whispered. I won't say it out loud. Her hand stayed near his, brushing once more, then settling close enough that he could feel every bit of warmth. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to close the distance. But he stayed still, caught between hesitation and longing. And in that stillness, something happened. Not with words, not with a clear action, but with the silence itself, heavy and full, carrying all the things they couldn't say. The moment stretched, long, fragile, unbreakable. The movie's music faded as the credits ended. The screen turned dark, the glow gone. The room fell into dimness, lit only by the faint morning light still seeping through the curtains. The boy finally let out a slow breath, his body relaxing though his chest still felt tight. He turned his head, meeting her eyes one more time. She held his gaze, and in that look everything was said without words. The boundary between them, the line they both had felt, the line they both had stayed behind, was no longer clear. It had blurred, softened, shifted. She leaned back again, her voice a whisper. Sometimes, it's better not to explain. Sometimes it's better just to feel it. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. His heart was too loud, his thoughts too tangled. The silence returned, wrapping around them, tender and heavy. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried a new weight, a new closeness. Outside, a car passed by, faint and distant. Life continued as normal. But inside, that small living room, nothing was the same. They had crossed a boundary, though no one could point to how or when. It wasn't in words, it wasn't even in action. It was in the quiet, in the nearness, in the unspoken. And as the boy sat there, his heart still unsteady, he knew. This morning would never be forgotten. The silence had changed everything. The room had grown quiet again after the movie ended. The television was dark now, the soft glow gone, and only the faint morning light filled the space. The clock kept ticking, steady and calm, but the silence around it felt heavier, almost gentle in its weight. The boy sat still, his hands resting on the blanket, his thoughts tangled. He could still feel the warmth of her presence, still hear the echo of her whispered words. Sometimes it's better just to feel it. Those words lingered in his chest, pressing softly against his heart. She sat beside him, leaning back, her eyes half closed as if she were resting. But she wasn't asleep. She was simply quiet, letting the moment settle. The tension from before was still there, but something else had joined it now, something softer, something like comfort. For the first time that morning, he let himself relax. His shoulders dropped slightly, his breath slowed, and the blanket, that had once felt heavy, now felt warm, protective. She opened her eyes and glanced at him, noticing the change. A small smile touched her lips, not playful, not teasing but tender. She whispered, "See? Silence can be peaceful too." He looked at her, his eyes uncertain, but soft. "It feels different with you here," he admitted, his voice low, almost afraid to say it out loud. Her smile deepened, faint but kind. Faint. "Different good?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, good." She turned her gaze back to the window where the curtains swayed lightly with a passing breeze. The sound of leaves rustling outside mixed with the steady hum of the house. Everything felt still, but alive. Her hand rested lightly on the couch again, close to his. She didn't move closer, didn't push, but she didn't pull away either. She simply stayed there, offering presence, not pressure. The boy took a slow breath, steadying himself. The morning had changed so quickly, from light laughter to silence, from teasing words to unspoken truths. And yet, here, in this moment, it felt safe. Not dangerous, not wrong, but safe. She seemed to sense his thoughts because she whispered again, her voice carrying both strength and softness. "Sometimes all we need is someone who understands without asking questions." Her words touched something deep inside him. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and for once, he didn't look away. The silence stretched, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was warm, like a blanket wrapped around them both. He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's what it feels like." She reached for the cup of tea again, lifting it slowly, though it had gone cold by now. She held it in her hands for a moment, then set it back down. The sound of porcelain on wood echoed faintly. She sighed, almost laughing at herself. "Cold already. I forgot about it." He smiled faintly, his lips curving just enough to show. "I guess we forgot about a lot of things." Her eyes flickered back to him, catching the double meaning in his words. She didn't tease him this time. She only smiled softly, a smile filled with understanding. The clock ticked on. The room stayed quiet. And yet, it felt as though they were speaking without words. The boy shifted, leaning back against the couch more fully, the blanket sliding slightly. His arm brushed lightly against hers, not on purpose, but not avoided either. She didn't move away. Instead, she let the closeness settle between them. It was not a bold closeness, not a step too far. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it was real. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house, the hum, the ticking, the faint whisper of the breeze. It all blended into something calming, something grounding. She spoke again, her voice almost like the breeze itself. "Strange how two people can sit in the same room every day, but then one day it suddenly feels like something new." He opened his eyes, turning his head toward her. "Yeah," he said softly. "Like you see everything differently." Her gaze lingered on him, her expression thoughtful, almost wistful. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. The boy let out a slow breath, his chest lighter now. For the first time in a long while, he felt understood, not because of words, but because of presence, because she was there, beside him, and that was enough. The sunlight slipped a little brighter through the curtains, painting soft patterns across the floor. The room seemed warmer now, not just from the morning light, but from the quiet connection between them. She leaned her head back against the couch, closing her eyes again, and whispered, "Sometimes this is all we need. Just this." He looked at her, the softness in her features, the calm in her voice, and nodded. "Yeah," he whispered back. "Just this." The silence returned once more, but this time it was gentle, safe. It was not heavy with fear or tension. It was light, like a secret refuge only they shared. And in that moment he realized, sometimes the greatest comfort doesn't come from words, or explanations, or answers. Sometimes it comes from simply being near someone who feels the same. The morning that had begun ordinary had become something unforgettable, Not because of the movie, not because of anything spoken aloud, but because of the silence that gave them refuge. Asterisk. The morning light had grown stronger now, slipping past the curtains in brighter streams. The dust in the air caught the sunlight, floating gently as if time itself had slowed. The television screen was still black, the sound gone, but neither of them had moved to turn it off. The boy sat in silence, his back pressed lightly against the couch, the blanket still across his lap. He wasn't thinking about the movie anymore. He wasn't even thinking about the silence. He was thinking about her. Every detail from the past hour stayed with him, the way her hand had rested near his, the way her eyes had held his, the way her words had lingered like shadows in the room. Nothing dramatic had happened, not really. And yet, everything had changed. He glanced at her carefully, as if afraid she might catch him staring. She was looking at the window now, her face calm, but her eyes far away. She looked thoughtful, maybe even a little sad, though he couldn't be sure. The weight in his chest grew heavier. It wasn't fear exactly, and it wasn't regret. It was something more complicated, a mixture of longing and guilt, warmth and unease, sweetness and danger. He shifted slightly, and the soft rustle of the blanket broke the quiet. She turned her head, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, the heaviness between them became sharp again, like a string pulled too tight. She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried something deeper. "You're quiet again," she said softly. He swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know what to say." Her smile wavered, almost fading. "Maybe there isn't anything to say," she whispered. Her words pressed against him harder than silence. Maybe she was right. Maybe words would only break what was fragile between them. And yet his heart still pounded, still pushed against his ribs as though trying to escape. The clock ticked on. Tick, tock. The sound was steady, but it felt like it was measuring more than time. It was measuring the distance between what had happened and what they dared not name. She leaned back, letting out a sigh, her eyes closing for a moment. "Funny," she said after a pause, "how something so small can feel so big." Her words struck him. Yes, that was exactly it. A brush of hands, a shared glance, a silence too long. None of it was loud, none of it was obvious. But together, it had become something heavy, something impossible to ignore. He nodded slowly, his voice low. "Yeah, it feels bigger than it should." Her eyes opened again and she looked at him, holding his gaze steady this time. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. The question hit him harder than he expected. His chest tightened, his stomach twisted. He thought for a moment, searching for the right words, but none came. Finally, he whispered, "No." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes still carried weight. "Neither do I," she said softly. The silence returned after that. But it wasn't calm anymore. It was heavy, thick with everything they had just admitted without really saying it. Outside, a car door slammed faintly, and footsteps echoed down the street. Life moved on beyond the walls, ordinary and unchanged. But inside, the weight of what had passed between them clung to the air. The boy looked down at his hands, twisting the blanket nervously. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't even know what he wanted to happen. All he knew was that the morning had left a mark on him, one he couldn't erase. She seemed to feel the same. Her body was still, but her expression was thoughtful, almost burdened. Her fingers traced lightly across the fabric of the couch, absent as though she were lost in her own thoughts. Finally, she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Some things change us, even when no one else will ever know." The boy lifted, his head, his heart aching at her words. He didn't answer, but she didn't expect him to. They both knew the truth in her voice. The weight of what had happened was not something either of them could easily carry, but it was theirs now, shared, unspoken, heavy and tender all at once. The sunlight shifted again, warmer now, filling the room with a glow that almost felt like forgiveness. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to let the light ease the tightness in his chest. When he opened them again, she was still watching him. Their eyes met, and in that look was everything: the sweetness of closeness, the danger of being seen, the bittersweet truth that nothing could be the same again. She smiled softly, though her eyes glistened with something he couldn't name. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "we'll carry it, even if we never speak of it again." He nodded, his throat too tight for words. He knew she was right. The weight was theirs, silent but real. The clock ticked on. Tick, tock. The world kept moving, but inside that small living room, time felt slower, heavier, and forever changed. The morning had stretched on quietly, and now the sunlight was brighter, painting long lines across the floor. The television was dark, the credits long finished, but neither of them had moved for a long time. They sat in silence, the air between them thick with what had been felt, what had been left unspoken. The boy shifted at last, pulling the blanket aside and sitting forward. His heart still felt heavy, though calmer now, as though the storm inside him had settled into something quieter, slower. He glanced at her, uncertain, but she only smiled faintly, as if to say she understood. The house was still except for the steady tick of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then came a soft sound. She rose slowly from the couch, her steps gentle against the carpet. She moved toward the kitchen, her presence filling the space even in silence. He listened, every sound sharper than it should have been: the clink of a cup, the running of water, the quiet pour of coffee into a mug. The aroma drifted back into the room, warm and familiar, carrying with it a comfort he hadn't realized he needed. She returned a moment later, holding a fresh cup. She placed it on the table, the porcelain touching wood with a delicate note. "For you," she said softly. He looked at her, surprised. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice rough. She sat down again, but this time there was a little more distance between them. Not much, but enough to remind him that something had shifted, that the closeness from before could not last forever. They sat quietly as he lifted the mug, the steam rising, warming his face. He took a small sip, the taste simple but grounding. The silence now felt different. It wasn't charged like before. It wasn't heavy with unspoken words. It was softer, calmer, touched with something like sadness. She leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. "The day feels different now," she said quietly. He nodded, unsure how to answer. His chest tightened at her words because he knew she was right. The morning had changed them, and the weight of it would not simply vanish. For a moment neither spoke. The ticking of the clock filled the space again, steady and relentless. Then she whispered, "We'll go back to normal after this. We'll have to." The boy swallowed hard. The thought hurt, though he tried not to show it. "Yeah," he said, softly. "We will." Her eyes flickered toward him, lingering for just a second, then turning away. Her expression was calm, but her silence said everything. The mug grew lighter in his hands as he drank slowly, the coffee cooling with each sip. He wanted to say something, anything, that would hold on to the morning a little longer. But the words never came. Instead, he listened. He listened to the faint clink as she shifted her cup, to the soft sound of her breath, to the distant noise of life outside. A dog barking, a car passing. Each sound reminded him that the world was still moving, that their small, fragile moment could not stop time. At last, she stood again. The sound of her footsteps was soft but certain. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. She turned back to him, her eyes meeting his one last time. "Some mornings stay with us forever," she whispered. His chest ached at her words. He wanted to ask her to stay, wanted to tell her how much this moment meant. but all he managed was a small nod. She gave him a faint smile, bittersweet, tender, almost sad. Then she turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall. A moment later, the quiet click of the door closing echoed through the house. And then silence. The boy sat alone on the couch, the blanket beside him, the empty mug in his hands. The morning light poured in through the curtains. Brighter, now almost too bright, the clock ticked on, steady and unbothered, marking the passage of time as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the silence wrap around him once more. The weight of the morning pressed against him, heavy but not unbearable. It was bittersweet, a memory already forming, something he knew would stay with him long after the day was gone. He thought of her words. Some mornings stay with us forever. He knew she was right. This morning, with its quiet silences, its unspoken closeness, its warmth and its weight, this morning would never leave him. The house was quiet again. The ordinary sounds returned. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint rustle of leaves outside. Life was normal once more. But inside, he carried something different. Something tender, something fragile, something almost too soft to name. He opened his eyes, staring at the empty space beside him on the couch. The warmth was gone, but the memory lingered. He let out a slow breath, a whisper to himself. I won't forget. And with that, he leaned back again, the silence filling the room. It was over. But it would never truly be gone.